Awesome. All right. Um, so I'm here with Liberty. Hello again,
Hello.
with Woodbine Education Center. And this is our second meeting around developing earned income revenue streams for Woodbine Education Center. So in the last meeting, um, I mostly focused on gathering information about the ideas for the business models that were on the table, where those ideas came from, what they might be, tied to in terms of resources or things like that. And then there was some homework to look at mapping the different business models in terms of their use of space and resources and looking for overlap and intersection. And then there was also homework around analyzing the 6 different business models on the table for how they reflect the mission, vision, theory of change, et cetera, for Woodbine, and values, filtering it through that lens. We also determined that there were 2 business models of the 6 that were going to receive the most focus, because they at least initially felt like the best fit and maybe the most revenue generating, the most viable options for the first year. So for this meeting, I assumed that we would stay focused on those 2 business models and that we would keep doing that unless something else comes up for the rest of our sessions. Um, so so in terms of what I thought we could accomplish today, my outline is that we would first just discuss any results that came out of the homework, what came up in that process. And so just discuss a little bit and see what feels alive around that from the homework. And then I'll share, I'll kind of introduce the business model canvas concept, which is a tool that we would be able to use throughout the next few sessions, and ongoingly you can use it to continue deepening and developing the business models. And it's a great tool to lead into a full business plan and a full financial model. So that we'll introduce it, we'll set it up, and we'll kind of start to use it a little bit today, or think of how we would use it. And that's just kind of going to then be background, because we will, as we continue to talk, we will be able to plug things into the canvas over time. And then the main part of the day, the main part of our session, so probably at least 30 minutes, would be would be to revisit what are the ultimate goals of Woodbine as far as these 2 revenue streams. What are the ultimate objectives? What's like the minimum viable outcome that you need to have happen? And then we will look at, I'll talk through briefly about the business development process in general and like why we're doing things in a certain order. And we'll talk a little bit about go and no-go points in that process to situate with what we're about to do. But the main bulk of this session, the 30 minutes at least, would be at the end, would be about starting to develop a concept of revenue and costs, which points us towards profitability. So it's like a theory of a business model is, how much revenue do we expect? What do we expect it will cost to actually deliver those goods and services? Revenue comes from selling goods or services, right? So how much revenue can we expect to sell for our products? What will it cost to produce the products? And then by subtracting one from the other, you end up with a basic concept of profit, gross profit margin. And that's helpful just to look at, is this a high profit activity, or does it have a low profit margin, in which case it's riskier, right? So we just kind of are going to really crudely map that out, and we'll be doing it live in a spreadsheet that I'll be sharing. So we'll just think it through, map it out, and we'll begin to look at that question of gross profit for the different business activities. We'll take it one at a time. So we'll either talk about property rentals or weddings at a time. But we'll just kind of map out the logic. It's like back of the napkin math, to see if this is something worth investing more energy into. Because when you map it out and this back of the napkin math, you might notice, it would actually cost so much to produce this good or service. We can't do it. It's actually going to have a very slim profit margin, which would mean that if we take this risk, it could end up not being profitable. It could end up, being an issue. So that's one stage in a process. It's just to kind of get that one piece addressed, and then we will discuss like the other pieces that would be coming in the business development journey. So I kind of want to just start there. And I know that you have some experience with financial modeling with like pro forma spreadsheets maybe. So yeah, so some of it will just be familiar, and we're just going to kind of hash it out and see how far we get. And then there'll be some homework, most likely. So yeah.
Excellent. I'm excited.
Great. All right, let's get into it. So we'll start with the homework. So share with me, if you would, what came up for you during the homework. And again, we're looking at two different business models: property leases and wedding rentals. And the homework was filtering business models through mission, values, theory of change of Woodbine, and then base mapping, so to speak, of the business activities of those two things and how they might intersect or overlap. So either one of those homework assignments we can start with, and just tell me what came up for you in that process.
Yeah. So we'll start with the homework assignment of sort of filtering and looking at those models through a particular lens. And I actually included also, we have like a thriving rentals program, or we're inheriting a rentals program. So that's when we rent space to groups to come do their trainings, workshops, retreats, etc. So since some of these are similar, and especially with the base mapping, I included that just to give that lens. So one thing that I found very interesting when I started looking at like the alignment to our missions and values, but also through like positives and negatives, I was seeing kind of this incline. So rentals really align with us through our mission and vision, as a hub and supporting organizations who are taking action, but also the positives to them are great, but also the negative is that sometimes that income stream is low because we're working with groups that we're giving discounted space to, so that they just have the ability to come at all to do that work. And then it sort of just increases. So property leases, helps us with our mission. It does create that hub atmosphere. We can consider ourselves an education hub. But there's also the possibility that these organizations may not align with us as well as organizations who just come and rent the space. So but the potential for income is a little bit higher, but and still pretty good alignment. And then the last stream that we're looking at, idea that we're exploring, is around weddings, which really does not align with us at all in terms of our mission and our values and our theory of change, but does have quite a high income level to it. So I just thought that was really interesting to see them kind of mapped out like that. Weddings, positives and negatives, we were looking at folks might be a bit demanding. It could be hard staff-wise, depending on how the particular people are. they may be wanting some exclusivity, so less things being able to happen while a wedding is taking place. But it also could be very easy, in that we really don't, a lot of these, we really don't have to do too much labor beyond preparing the facility, and making sure that it's, in the right state for whatever activity is set to happen. Um, so that was interesting. I also, uh, started realizing that a lot of these streams are very susceptible to the pandemic. So, they are, um, kind of reliant on being able to physically gather. Um, it's not that cost effective if we're gathering in groups of 10 to, have this large space. And then the second, piece of the homework was to sort of look at these different streams through a base mapping, lens. So that's sort of like layering, space, time, different things like that. So, um, I also noticed another sort of incline between these three rentals. So rentals from organizations, mostly use our buildings. So they mostly, just need lodging, and then they're going to be occasionally using different spaces for meeting, or occasionally using the land, to be on, but not all the time. So in terms of like exclusivity, it's really their sleeping spaces that are sort of allotted just for them. And then property leases, they're using, they could be using the buildings, although they probably would not be using the lodging quarters. So that was interesting to see. It seems like it would be great to have property leases that are more looking to use space on the land, um, as opposed to the spaces that we use for rentals. So that was good to see. And then
To clarify
weddings.
that,
Oh,
do you
yes.
mean like undeveloped spaces where it's just outdoors, or are there
Yes.
facilities? Okay, got it.
Yeah. I mostly mean we do have structures out on the land. Um, for instance, a composting toilet is out in the field, or we have a cob oven in some of the outside social areas. We have a stage in one area. So there's some structures, um, but they're not the inside structures, they're not the buildings. Um, that's what I mean by the land. Thanks for that. So for weddings, I was noticing that because of that sort of exclusivity factor, where they might want to go for pictures, or where different parts of their ceremony and, reception might be held, they're really looking at like the majority of the facility. Buildings, there could be overnights, weddings could be out on the land, pictures could be out on the land. So they're using a large portion of the property, but also they're occasional. So time wise, they're probably the shortest. And time wise, the longest is going to be these long term property leases that we have with someone. But I think they could work, because if someone is, say, using our field, for something, that doesn't mean that that's necessarily happening all the time. So a wedding could take place in that spot, even though we have plants growing or different things of that nature. So it was an interesting exercise to see it in that way.
Thank you. Awesome observations. Very relevant, I think, to thinking through what's a good fit for Woodbine's activities. Um, Now, I wanted to speak to this didn't come up earlier, but it did come up in the first meeting, and I do want to make sure we make a little bit of time to address it, which is um, adaptations that are relevant to COVID pandemic space, like how to maybe make these revenue streams or alternative revenue streams more resilient to possibilities in terms of restrictions in the environment because of the pandemic. Um, I did have a couple thoughts on that, or at least questions that we could go into. So maybe we can make a few minutes at the end just to kind of seed some thoughts, and maybe that could be a homework thing to think more about adaptations.
Yeah, that would be
Because
great.
you're very right to be concerned about that. Wedding rentals could be highly lucrative, but not if they're not
Mhm.
feasible because of environmental factors. So the market there is very volatile, and it is for everyone in that industry right now, for sure. Um, yeah.
Mhm.
So we'll just flag that to come back to, like, maybe spend a few minutes at the end. We'll talk about, I'll just make a note on my agenda here to say, let's talk about COVID adaptations.
Yeah, that would be great. It's, very pressing on our minds.
Right. Okay. And then, okay. So let's see. All right. So I'm going to share my screen and we can go into the business model canvas.
Great.
Okay. Okay. You should be seeing a spreadsheet that's formatted as a business model canvas. Is that what you see?
Yep. Yeah.
Great.
Looks good.
So this is a template. I did not create it, but it's a template that is a way to kind of fill out and have a shared space, if multiple people are filling it out, of a business model canvas. And if you watched the video, the 2-minute video, or saw the links that I shared at the end of last meeting, then you probably have seen this kind of thing. So there are 9 sections to this board, and it's a way of, in one page, again, just like mapping the different pieces that need to be considered for a business plan. And there's different ways to proceed through this. This is the standard one that was created and defined by a community called Business Model Generation. And they have a standard flow where you start, I think you actually don't remember what they start with, but the video illustrates it. It's like the path through the document. But what I like is to think of it for now as just a place to capture and dump the ideas that come up that are relevant to each different section. So if it's too small of text, let me know, because I can definitely zoom in. But in terms of the 9 sections that are here, I want to ask, what do you think we've already discussed about these business models? And we can choose one or the other, property leases or wedding rentals, and put it into the title up here. But what have we already discussed just from last meeting even,
Mm-hmm.
or just from what we just discussed about the homework that we could plug in right now if we wanted to?
Yeah. We did some exploring around resources last time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Yep.
we could um, start plugging some of that info in.
Mm-hmm. Key resources.
Mm-hmm.
What
Um,
else?
we did talk a little bit about customers,
Mm-hmm.
audiences last meeting.
Yep. Who
Yeah,
are your target customers?
that's right. Yeah, those are the 2 that I got
Mm-hmm.
so far.
I think we also talked about activities.
Oh, that's right.
What are the
We
key
did.
activities of this business model? So it's a little elegant, it's somewhat elegant in your business models, where it's really about land use, space use,
Mm-hmm.
facilities use, but yeah, that those would be key activities: the occupation of those spaces, the use of those spaces. Um, Excellent. Yeah, we didn't spend too much time on value proposition just yet, or on channels, like how do you communicate with your customers? How do you reach them? We touched on that, but we didn't really spend much time on that.
Yeah.
Um, so today we're going to look at the revenue streams and cost structure pieces of this document, and that'll form the bulk of the activity today. but yeah, so this is like it's a tool. I will give you, actually, I'll just do it right now. I'll give you sharing privileges on this, or editing privileges, so you can actually start plugging in these things. And my role here is to like help you think these things through, but I'm not thinking that I'm responsible for filling it out. This is really your tool to continue developing over time. So we can just say for property leases and wedding rentals. Let's just rename
Mm-hmm.
it that, because what you can do is make a copy of this and just add a new sheet down
Mm-hmm.
here. So we'll just rename this one, rename property leases, and then we'll name this one wedding rentals. And then it's just a matter of copying the blank template, pasting it over, and then you have the two business models to work from. You can also change the name up here at the very top, in this field or wherever, to be like, so that you know which page you're on, property models or property leases versus wedding rentals. But
Right.
yeah, so this is there, and all of the notes from our meetings are something that you have access to. You may not actually technically have access to them just yet, but when we conclude I think it was 4 sessions, so this is the
Mm-hmm.
second of 4. Great. So when we conclude our relationship, you will be receiving all of the notes from everything, so you can have those things as reference materials,
Great.
and build these out.
Great.
Cool. So I'm going to stop screen sharing, and then I'm going to go back to my notes. Do you have any questions before we move on about Business Model Canvas?
Um, no, not right now. So, yes.
Sure.
So, um, so it seems like this is sort of just a snapshot, and that some of these things, if you were to further explore a business plan, you would dive into them in a deeper way. Does that sound about right?
um,
I mean,
so yes, so this is like where to pull all the basic ideas together in one place. That's one page, right? Business
right.
plans are many pages, and it's easy to get lost in the words, right? So especially if you're working with a team to generate these ideas, it's really nice to see it in one place and get it as concise as you can, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that it's a really lucid vision. And then yes, you would end up adding a lot more detail to the actual implementation plan, the strategy, the market analysis, things like that in a business plan.
Gotcha. Kind of like a dashboard,
Yeah, it
or
is. It's very much, I like that word. It's a good way to think of it. It's a dashboard for your business plan,
mm-hmm.
because your business plan should have all these pieces of information represented in it. This canvas can help you organize your business plan. Um, so yeah, it's all the basic pieces of information that are essential to a business model. Like if you haven't addressed channels, for example, how you're going to reach your customers, how you're going to distribute the goods and services to them, right? Then you're missing a piece of your actual model. You can't really say you have really a model quite yet. So that's what I love about it. It's just one place for all that information.
Yeah,
So
great.
yeah, so we're building towards a business model, which is like a theory of the business and how it will be profitable. So we're gonna move to that specific question next, in terms of cost structure and then revenue opportunities. So um, so I just want to before I do that, I want to quickly give an overview. Sorry, I want to quickly give an overview of like how to think of what we're doing here. So the first stage in a business development process, is to really set goals and objectives, right? Those are like the North Star. It's the thing that you're always orienting everything that you're doing towards. It's what needs to happen for me, for this organization, for this to be successful. What is the metric of success? So um, you want to set the goals, objectives, requirements that you're measuring success against. And so we've already actually done that. And so I want to first, before we go into the actual financial model, review what the goals and objectives are here. The second step would be to, and at least in terms of the process that feels intuitive, would be to mock up a theory of a profitable business model, which is what we'll be doing today. Like how, here's what we think we can earn. Here's what we think it would cost to earn that, to actually deliver the goods and services. Is there a margin that's like profitable? Could we be profitable doing this? So with that creates a kind of go or no go point where you look at it and you say, if this profit margin looks decent, then we should continue to evaluate this as an option. If it doesn't, we should reconsider, right? Now this is very back of the napkin math. As I mentioned, it's very crude. So once you kind of get a sense of whether this is worth considering, you can move forward with the other considerations and get more detailed in the actual mapping of specific expenses and costs. So like in a pro forma, are you familiar with the term pro forma?
Um, I know someone has used it, and I asked what it was, and then I was like, "Oh yeah, okay, that totally makes sense." But if you could
Yeah,
tell me again.
I'd be happy to. And I'm guessing that you probably have actually done one without maybe calling it that. Pro
Yeah, that
forma
was.
is
I remember. That's exactly how I felt.
yeah, totally. So a pro forma is the set of financial documents describing a business before it's launched. So the hypothesis of a business, not the actual financials, but the projected financials. So what you'll be doing for each of these business models is creating a pro forma. Now, how complex you want it to be is up to your capacity, your discretion. But we're going to get really crude, really basic here today, and it'll be a platform, right, for getting more detailed. So the pro forma, so what a pro forma addresses, because there's really two very different things to be considering here in terms of financial documents. There's starting up the business, which comes with its own set of costs that are often paid back by the profits of the business operations, the business model, over time. That's why you often hear that like businesses are often quote unquote in the red, losing money for their first few years. And then they start making money and are able to like maybe pay back some of that startup cost. Now, in this context, perhaps startup is kind of just rolled into the salaries and operations of Woodbine as an entity. So it's a little different than if you were an entrepreneur and starting up and needing to obtain all separate, distinct financing sources and everything. But just understand, whatever the startup costs, we wouldn't want to model that, and we would want to consider that in terms of Woodbine's leverage. There's always a risk, right? You're always taking a risk to start a business. You have to put up some capital, put up some collateral to say, we think this is going to work. We hope it's going to work. We've done our homework. So let's try it, right? Because the thing is, after it pays itself back, after the first few years, you have a business that's running and it's making money every year over year. So you're just keeping those profits after that point. And that's the goal, right? I mean, just at a very basic level of what we're doing here is having the profits to be a source of income that keeps everything going. So there's the starting up, which is its own set of considerations. And the relevant financial documents for starting up include sources and uses. That's the name of a document, sources and uses. And that's really your startup financial map. How does this business get launched? And then over here on the actual business model side, you have the financials of what it looks like when the business is running, when it's actually operating. So that's where you have a balance sheet, you have cash flow. The cash flow sheet is really where you see the actual action, like how much are we spending? Like it's your actual ledger, right? How much, well, it's not your ledger, but it's like a ledger. How much are we spending? How much are we making? Is it balancing? That's the cash flow sheet. So today we're going to kind of mock up a cash flow sheet. We're going to say, how much will we be making? How much will we be spending to make that money? And we'll get some accrued formula there. So what I want to do is treat it as like maybe there's a few different ways we could do this. We could look at it as a monthly thing or as an annual thing, like on a monthly basis. What do we think the revenue will be and expenses? Or we can look at it annually, or anything in between, but those are the two standard ways. So whatever feels right, whatever feels right. But yeah, that's what we're going to do today. Any questions about those? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, any questions about pro forma? And then I have a few more things to say before we go into it.
No, I'm good on the financial models. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and some of this may be familiar to you. So if so, great, because that just means you're set up to do this on your own once these materials are in your hands. So, and there's a lot of, I really like the template workbooks that are put out by organizations like the Small Business Administration, SBA, and also SCORE. They tend to have these like generalized models that are really detailed. Like they talk about everything, amortization, depreciation. They're sometimes too much, like it feels overwhelming to just look at it, but because it's really a generalized template for any business model, it's really useful when you're ready to think through the details to try to use it, plug it in, and because it's a linked workbook, you don't have to do the work of reproducing any of the work. You just do it once and it's in there and it's referenced by all the other relevant models, relevant documents. So once you get there, I would say there's a lot of good resources out there, and I can help guide you to a more detailed pro forma model to use. Again, today is just back of the napkin math, but it'll help inform the pro forma. So the go, no-go point around this is if after considering the pro forma, really the full picture of like, what are we spending, what are we earning, is this going to work and pay itself back, and are we going to make a profit? If that looks good, then and if the business looks feasible internally, as far as resources deployed and costs, then you can take it to the next level. And so these two things actually kind of come together. Market analysis. So market analysis is really looking critically at, can the market support this business model? Is there a market for what we're trying to sell, basically? What are the characteristics of that market? What are the trends in that market? And looking critically at this third party, objective information, you can make an assessment as to not just is this going to work, but what strategies are appropriate so that we make sure it works. Maybe in this industry, customers respond really, really well to this kind of communication. Well, that means we can use that communication. We will use that in our strategy as to how we will implement this business model to help ensure success. So in your business plan, this section is about, analyzing the market, critically thinking about how you will plug in with that market effectively. And if there are concerns, instead of dismissing them, you want to engage them and say, okay, this is a thing that might happen. This is something we read about in the literature. How are we going to adapt to this? So that's another phase in this process. And you modify your pro forma projections based on your market research. And once you look at the market, do that market analysis, you're asking yourself, now does this look viable?
Mm-hmm.
Now does this look like something we could really make money off of? Maybe what you discover is the wedding rentals market, for example, is like very depressed and many businesses are losing money on it. Well, then that might tell you that although it seems like a good idea, it's really not a good idea when you look under the hood, right? So that's another go, no-go point where you say, does this look viable? If so, proceed. If not, reconsider. And then at that point, you basically have done the things that have gotten you to a viable business model, hopefully. Like ideally, you are able to say, yes, we're going to move forward. And the best test as to whether your hypotheses are strong enough is to go try to get financing with your idea, right? Take your business plan, take your pro forma to a lender and say, hey, would you give us a loan for this to start this up, a startup loan, right? And they will have feedback. They will be able, they're trained to critically analyze your materials, and they'll tell you what they see as strengths or weaknesses in your proposal. And then you can take your materials through another iteration and have another go, no go type of a point. So yeah, so those are the basic stages of things to address in the general development process. And it's really good to have like a committee, like a steering committee, or is really like driving, a particular business model's development. And, so you might have like a property lease committee, and you might have a wedding rentals committee to really focus on market research. And like, you can do surveys of your potential customers or past customers. You can do all sorts of activities related to building this out. And it's good to have a committee just because it's helpful to have multiple perspectives on the question of should we move forward or not, right? It's helpful to get feedback from diverse perspectives. Is this worth moving forward on still? Cool. So I just wanted to give a little bit more context for business development process in general, so that you kind of know where we're at. So like next meeting, we'll talk more about market analysis, and then you'll keep going on this particular type of a path.
Great.
Cool. All right.
That was really helpful.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Do you have any questions about any of that before we move on?
No, I think we'll get into some of the details.
Cool.
Later. So yeah.
Excellent. All right.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, maybe we'll get to it. In order, like the attempting to get financing part.
Yeah.
Could you use that process just as a feedback model without
Yes.
really attempting to accept their money?
100%.
Okay.
Yes. So in your circumstance, you might be able to internally finance or fundraise as a nonprofit for the startup costs related to each of these businesses. But it's a fantastic exercise to go talk to a lender and see if they would be willing to give you a loan, because that's the ultimate measure of whether they think from their analysis that you've answered all the right questions and you've really done your thinking, and that they would trust the proposal strongly enough that they would give you tens of thousands of dollars and hope you pay it back, right? That's the ultimate measure. So it's a fantastic thing to do, even if you actually don't ultimately need debt-based financing from a bank. You still can do that. Absolutely.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and that's another, just while it's fresh on my mind, not just lenders, but also experienced business owners, experienced people in finance, etc. Great to build an advisory team who can actually serve as consultants throughout the process, but especially in those later stages where you're saying, okay, we're thinking we would launch this soon. Can you vet it? Can you give us feedback? So it's a great thing to ask your community if people have those specialized skills and would be willing to provide a set of eyes on it and consult. So yeah, always a good idea. Don't have to be lenders. They can just be people with experience in these fields. Industry specific experience is fantastic too. Like if you have people in your network really specialized in property management, or collective or co-working scenarios or weddings, then talk to them. Maybe reach out to them soon just to get them, put a bug in their ear that you're interested in working with them. So
great.
Yeah,
in our case it might also be a recruitment tool, because as we grow our board.
That's right. Definitely. And that was another thing I just want to flag, is that of the 6 business models, the 2 that we're focusing on, it was clear to me from the first meeting that these 2 would be handled in-house, not through a partnership, whereas some of the other business models might involve partnership with an entrepreneur. This is in-house. So that is something I'm assuming in this context, that
Yeah,
WEC would hold these things.
that's right.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's very relevant to your board development. Okay. So we're running a little short on time. I'm sorry, I can be very verbose sometimes. But I want to, before we go on to the back of the napkin math, I just want to quickly review the goals. Like, what are your goals for these business streams? So revenue goals, you discussed you want 2/3 of Woodbine Education Center's income to be from earned income streams.
Mm-hmm.
You discussed that you already have an established program of rentals, and that amounts to $100,000. But can you remind me of what proportion is $100,000 to your total budget, to your total expenses, or I'm sorry, your total income?
Yeah,
What proportion
so
to your total income
$100,000 is roughly a third.
is 1/3? Great. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have to cover another third by some business streams, whether it's one business or two or three, some amount of earned income to complement
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
to
right.
clarify, you don't expect that the um, existing program will be growing or staying the same or losing
A
money. It'll
hundred,
be the same.
yeah, 100,000 is a growth.
Oh, okay. Is a
So
growth.
yeah,
Great.
so the probably current, I'd say, is about 60
Okay.
to 70, and I anticipate that we can fairly easily grow to 100,000, just by kind of advertising, word of mouth, and then the openness to like sort of have the facility booked back to back.
Uh-huh. So booking more aggressively in terms of
Hmm.
the schedule. Okay.
Yeah, prior to now, it's sort of been like, oh, we have a week off. That's great. Now we can
Gotcha.
breathe a little bit, but it's not going to be like that in the future.
Okay. So if 100,000 is about 1/3, then we are
Mhm.
looking for another 100,000.
That's right.
Okay. Great.
Roughly. Yeah.
Right. Of additional earned income streams. Okay. Now, I do want you to, well, so we don't have time to address it right now, but what I would say is if you've identified other outcomes that like
Mhm.
impacts that are non-financial that you really want to attach to these businesses, definitely a good homework assignment to do
Okay.
that. And you would account for it differently. It's not this, it wouldn't be in the pro forma per se, but it is part of the narrative. It's like if there's other qualitative impacts, or if the money from these things is funding other things within the nonprofit, that can be a source of narrative that increasingly customers, there's a certain mindset where they're looking for impact. They're looking for how is my dollar benefiting things, right? So that
Yes.
can be an angle for how you market it, particularly if you plan to market it in a way that's really like consistent with your identity, values, et cetera, like with your existing nonprofit brand. That's a choice. You don't actually have to do that. You could create a very different type of entity, for example, that markets wedding rentals, in terms of how it looks and feels and what its angle is. And you would really want to talk to a marketing expert around whether, like, what's the right choice there as far as branding. But if you wanted to really keep a strong linkage in the narrative between the nonprofit and the social enterprise funding the nonprofit, then you can really, yeah, you can just leverage that story. So for
Yeah.
homework, it would be identifying other impacts or outcomes besides the 100,000 revenue. Besides
Right.
revenue, what are the things you want to attach to the business?
Mhm.
Not to complicate things, it's just thinking about, triple bottom line or
Mhm.
multiple,
Mhm.
cascading benefits. Like, what are the other things you can say the business is delivering on, other promises the business is delivering on? You can talk
Right.
about jobs, you can talk about, training opportunities or internships. You can talk about anything that creates an impact and how is it feeding your mission, vision, values. So it's like just taking the homework a next step further.
Right. Yeah, I've heard sometimes I may be getting the words wrong, but sometimes people are referring to it as like a social impact budget. Like
Yes,
yeah, so
right.
it's just the non-financial, non-dollars and cents impact and accounting
Yeah.
for that in a sort of budget way.
Yes, and there are definitely tools and different models, like there is with Business Model Canvas. There's different things that you can use to do that, and probably would be good to look up some resources together and see what makes sense for Woodbine. But for now, maybe just brainstorm what matters. Is there anything
Yeah.
that, and it's okay to actually answer that question with actually nothing else matters besides the income, or but the income is our first priority, and then we can look at those other impacts later. Like it's legitimate to say that. It's just something to do as homework to think about.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great. So let's get into it now. I'm going to share my screen. With the revenue model. So here we go. Share screen. Here we go. Share. Okay. You should now be seeing a spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So let's pick one business model to do this mock-up for. Do you want to do wedding rentals or
That sounds
properties?
good.
Wedding rentals? Okay.
Yeah.
Rentals. Okay. So some of this will be a review from last time. But what we're going to talk about first is, so the revenue section. You can think of these as sections that are split up here. I'll make a little line to show that they're separated. So the revenue section is a matter of what gross incomes are projected from the sale of goods and services, and generally a standardized product. So in this case, the standardized product would be like a 1-day rental or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me more, what is the product and how much do you think you could charge for it?
So, looking at probably like an exclusive full facility rental,
Mm-hmm.
one day.
1 day.
Um,
Okay.
and I think that maybe we keep it simple here, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that we could look at like 4-hour chunks or 5-hour chunks versus overnights. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I
Okay.
think we might be able to offer that as like an additional type of product or unit.
Uh-huh. Great. Okay. Well, let's make
Um,
different
okay.
spaces for that. So I'm going to just delete this little thing. I'm going to say, so 1 day, and then you also
Mhm.
said hours. Could you say that again?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's like from what I've seen, and maybe we'll be able to refine it when we do market research, but it
Mm-hmm.
seems like people do like 4 to 6 hour kind of chunks for like cleanup and setup, all inclusive in that time frame. So
Okay.
setting up, a wedding happens, cleaning up after it. Um,
Gotcha.
yeah, so rates,
Mm-hmm.
should we jump there?
Well,
So, oh, go ahead.
just I want to think a little bit more about what would be the obligatory package. Like, could somebody buy 1 day, or do they have to buy 1 day plus the 4 hours of cleanup? And what's the base package? And then there could be add-ons, which is great. But like, what is that
Hmm.
base product, do you think?
Yeah, I think the base is that 4 hour, um, 4 hour
Mm-hmm.
unit. Um, like probably
Okay.
no less than that, and then everything that's in the 4 hour would be in the 6 hour. Everything that's in the six
Got
hour
it.
would be in the overnight option. Just
Okay.
additional things beyond that.
Cool. one
Yeah, this
day.
is
Oh, and you mentioned the overnight too is a separate
yes.
thing.
Oh yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
So the 4 hour unit, I don't imagine
I
you could
actually
have a wedding in 4 hours, right? Or could you? Maybe you could. Um, yeah.
yeah, I do. I think some people do, especially if
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's just their reception or maybe
Uh-huh.
it's just their ceremony and they're going some other place. And actually, I'm not sure. I think maybe we can delete that one day because I
Mm,
feel like the
okay.
one day is an overnight. I don't see how somebody
I see. Gotcha. Okay.
could one day, yes, yeah, but not
Okay.
stay overnight or okay.
Great.
Um, so yeah, rates. Um, can we work backwards? Because
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think what we have talked about in terms of a full like an overnight for a 24-hour period
Mm-hmm.
at at 4,000.
Okay.
We may even be able to up that, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're thinking. So that would include the full facility plus the lodgings, typically for like a 24 hour. So you might arrive at 1 p.m., leave by 1 p.m. The next day.
So full facility plus lodgings and 24 hours.
Mhm,
Okay. Actually, let me add that. Well, so full facility and lodgings. Oh, lodgings, that's the difference,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
But
Yeah,
everything is always full facility otherwise, right?
right.
Okay,
Mhm.
great. So this would be plus lodgings.
Yes.
Oops. Plus lodgings. Oops, I keep spelling lodgings wrong. Lodgings. There we go. And 24 hours access.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
And we might, just as a note, we might um, be very specific about those hours. So, for instance, we may require somebody leave by 1 p.m. or something
Mm-hmm.
so that we could book somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that might be like restricted hours.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that's great. Great. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And that's all about, like, what you're getting at is standardizing the product.
Hmm.
So the expectations are really clear. What are they getting for that amount, for that price? So we've got
Hmm.
4,000 on that price, for a price on that product. What else?
Yeah, and then the 4 hour and the 6 hour,
Mm-hmm.
I'd want to explore a little bit more because there's not a lot of difference in terms of
Mm-hmm.
our say cost of putting that on, and
Uh-huh.
we wouldn't really be able to like book
Mm.
2 4 hours or something. Um, so they're sort of they're taking up prime spot there. So
Mm.
um,
Okay.
I was thinking like a 4 hour might be somewhere around 3,000 and a six
Okay.
or yeah. Well, let's start there. Maybe
Sure.
a three
Why don't we
thousand.
take away the 6 hour for now?
Okay,
We can all, you could always add it in, and you just know that it would be between 3,000 and 4,000, right? So
right.
you have a sense of that range.
Sounds great.
Okay. So let's say, just keep it simple, right? So let's say you're selling your only standard products are your 1 day or your 4 hour at 4,000 or 3,000. How many of these products do you expect to be sold? Now, this is where we have to decide, are we doing monthly or annual? Either one's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. So um, I was sort of anticipating that. So we want a balance. So we have a
Mm-hmm.
balance between like this model that maybe isn't really so in line with our mission,
Yep.
and we want to balance the time that these two things have. So we want to ensure that we have the time and the space to accommodate our
Right.
other businesses. So I think we want to limit the amount of time that we can spend on wedding rentals to 8 weeks out of the year.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's probably about for both of these. That's probably we could do a Friday, a Saturday, or a Sunday. Those would be the
Mm-hmm.
typically the days of the week that people would be interested. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
so 3 times 8 is 24.
Okay. Great. Now, that would be the maximum
Mm-hmm.
possible. So I'm actually going to capture that here. Maximum possible. Now that might be difficult when it comes to turnaround, cleaning, and so you may actually consider that well, if that is feasible, just thinking about the costs to accommodate on either side of the product in terms of servicing the product. For example,
That's right.
you may only be able to do one day per weekend, and then you could have 2 4 hours on either
Mm-hmm.
side of that, but you can't do 3 one-days per weekend, for
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
So yeah, so anyway, so maximum would be 24 total.
Right.
And then you may need to break it up like, how does doing 8 and 16 for the 4
Yeah.
hours and the 1 day? Okay, great. So that's the maximum. Now, what would the math be on the maximum? Here, let me just make some more lines. Like I said, it's very crude right now. We're just mocking it up. All right, so the maximum
Wow, this is so
revenue
interesting.
would be, we'll do this times this equals 48,000. This times this, 32,000.
Mhm.
So that's looking pretty good, getting you close to that 100,000 even just with this model. But again, we're
Mhm.
talking about the maximum right now,
Right.
and there probably will be. I'd say there's a 99% chance that there will need to be more refinement of whether this is feasible. Whether
Mhm.
assuming that all 3 days can be used for weddings, whether that's feasible, whether you'll actually be able to sell all 3 days, whether those products are, um, uh, really of interest to your customers. And then the 3,000 and the 4,000, there's going to need to be some research as to whether that's an appropriate market rate. You
Mhm.
also want to factor in things like coupons. Is there any incentives you're going to run for the first year? Anything that might cause you to actually lose a little bit of money on your first few products, but it gets people really aware of your brand, and it sets you up for success in the long term. So these are all things to factor in ultimately
Mhm.
when you're doing
Mhm.
this modeling. Um, so definitely researching the price, make sure it's market rate. Are these products actually of interest? Like the 4 hour versus the 1 day, is the pricing right? Or is the 4 day really, should it be less? Should the 1 day be more? Maybe the 4 day is 3,000, but the 1 day is 5. Like what's
Mhm.
the value add of really doing a full 24-hour thing versus 4 hours? So these are all things to consider. And because we're just scratching the surface, I'm just going to mention those things. But we have like a really crude number here. We've got 48,000 plus 32,000 equals 80,000. Okay, great. So we only have 2 minutes left, but let's just add another 5 minutes on just to kind of get the juices flowing, and then you can take this over and actually continue working with this sheet as homework.
Mhm. Mhm.
So cost of goods sold is what does it cost to deliver on those products.
Yeah.
So there's two different kinds, fixed or variable. Fixed means the cost is the same no matter how many products you sell. Um, Variable is the number of products you sell ties exactly to the costs expenditures. So if you sell, for example, janitorial services would be variable because the number that you sell is the number of, janitorial services that you actually need to commission. If you sell 10 weddings, then you need 10 janitorial services. So that's a variable cost. Fixed would be things like, um, the marketing budget, for example.
Mhm.
I guess that's somewhat variable, but it's actually more of a fixed cost because you're deciding up front what that budget's going to be, and you're going to implement a marketing plan. So regardless of how many you sell, it doesn't change. It's already a set commitment of a cost. So let's go through. At the very least, we can capture the categories here. So we have staff and payroll.
Mhm.
So this might involve, who would be involved under staff and payroll as a category?
Yeah, so I think we're gonna have janitorial staff would be separate.
Uh-huh. Great. So we'll do
and
contract.
mhm.
Okay.
And
Janitorial.
then yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, perfect. And then staff and payroll, that's gonna look like probably a rotating position amongst staff of like who would be there to sort of supervise and orient groups and
Okay.
help them with the things that they need. Yes, there you go.
What about, so in addition to liaison, you need a point person for each
That's
contract, right? Okay, so a
right.
coordinator,
Yes,
we'll
and
say contract.
that would be one person. Hmm.
Okay, so that would be, uh, so it's one staff person. Now let's say, the one way to think about this is as a proportion of their total salary. So if this is one of your full-time people, what's the full-time salary
Right,
divided by the percent of their job that would be spending their time this way?
right. Yeah, hard to say. Maybe 15 or 20%.
Okay, we'll say 15. Let's just say 20. Safer to be safer to overestimate costs and underestimate revenue. So
Mm-hmm.
what would be the annual salary?
About 50,000 a
Okay,
year. Yeah, that
great.
that particular person, that particular role has many uh, duties beyond this. So,
Right, exactly. So that's where it's helpful, and it's also helpful for your job description to get um, clear on the expectations and budget for each program based on how much time is spent. So in this case, this would actually be a cost of the business, right? So you're the 20% of the 50,000 is a cost of the business, not a cost of Woodbines in your modeling,
right,
right?
right,
So okay,
right.
so we're going to take 50,000 times 20%. So that's $10,000 right there. Cool. And that's somewhat of a fixed cost, so we'll make a note of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're going to say fixed. Okay. Janitorial, this will be variable.
Mm-hmm.
So for one, each product, we'll say, each distinct wedding, what would be the janitorial commitment if you had
Uh,
to estimate it?
I would say maybe about 4 hours,
Okay,
and we're paying somewhere between 15 and 20. So maybe
okay.
we just say 20 to.
Four times 20.
Mm-hmm.
And then times, we're going to say the total number of units sold is 24. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll say 4 times 20 times 24 is 1,920.
Okay.
I'll make a note over here. So this is like our notes column. 4 hours times 20 an hour times 24 units. Great.
Great.
So you see what I'm doing here. I'm just building this out. Some other and we're running out of time, so I'm just going to list off some of these other categories that I noted down as probably relevant to the
Mm-hmm.
business model itself, which is staff time as a proportion of total salary. We covered that. Is there a professional development cost for the role to be played here? If so, you would need to like this particular
Development.
role of
Mm-hmm.
this business. Pro dev question mark. Are there other ancillary costs related to staff? You're also going to want to factor those in. So if staff also has benefits that have a
Right.
financial value, you want to also include that in your budget. All right, benefits question mark. Cool. Additionally, we've got the use of the land is the real value here. So questions around the land would be, are there improvements that are needed? That would be like a startup cost to just get those taken care of up
Right.
front. Is there also, so that would be like a fixed cost. If you need to make improvements, that's a fixed cost. If there's variable costs where after every wedding, there's some restoration or something, some kind of depreciation to be accounted for each wedding, then that might be something to factor. So that could be variable depending on the number of actual weddings. Let's see, I have improvements, depreciation. I have equipment that's like fixed costs in terms of assets. So if you need to buy tables and chairs, right? Those are fixed costs. Doesn't matter how many weddings you use them for, they're just the same price. Supplies that are consumable, that would be a variable cost. So if you need to provide tablecloths that may get damaged or whatever, that may be not as good an example, but napkins or I
Right.
don't know, cups, like things like that. That would be a variable cost for each wedding. And again, for some of these, you can just estimate. You can put a budget line item to it. Like I think it'll cost $100 for like Post-its, and and poster boards, stuff like that. But we don't know till we test the theory. But in other things, you might actually want to create a separate breakdown of like
Right.
exactly everything you're going to spend money on, and
Right.
then just bring the final total over to this figure. Other things to consider would be utilities, expense that can be considered. Again, it's a little flexible, like there's different ways of doing this. You can treat your utilities as variable and actually calculate it for each wedding. If you have a baseline of how your utilities go up with each wedding, like if you actually are measuring that, you can put a variable amount here. But you can also just estimate a total, and then that becomes more like a budget, a fixed, like, well, we think it's going to be this, and we're going to run that assumption for the first year and go from there. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be blurry. Just use your best thinking and make a note of what your assumptions are.
Right.
So marketing, maintenance and repairs, depreciation, wear and tear. Those are some things that come to mind. Oops. Just minimized it. Here we go.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay. Marketing. Maintenance. So, and that would be repairs, like that's the wear and tear bit.
Yeah.
Having an annual budget for that is a good idea. So yeah, this is a start, and I'm sure you'll have your own, as you go into this, your own thoughts of additional categories and additional costs. And so you want to, again, overestimate costs, underestimate revenue. So we're breaking that rule a little bit because we're kind of overestimating revenue probably. And that's assuming that these prices are market rate. But if these prices actually could go up based on the market, then we're not, we're good. So all of this is flexible. But what it does is, as you plug these things in, as you refine it, it tells a story of the back of the napkin, the profit margin, right? So ultimately, you'll end up with a total list of expenses that's your best guess at all of the things it'll take to deliver, there's two ratios here: to deliver any product, like a single product, and to deliver all your products. So that's a matter of the fixed versus variable. So your fixed costs might be 60% of your revenue. So that doesn't matter how many weddings you offer. You will be spending 60% of $80,000, for example, once you work these numbers out. Then the variable is like each time you multiply it by the number that you get. And so that could go up to 70 or 80% or whatever of that 80,000. But so those are key ratios is what they're called. When you're looking at like the fixed, like no matter how many we sell, it's gonna cost us this much to deliver a single product. And then if we sell, the variable price, however many we sell, it'll cost this per unit. And then from that cost and then the revenue above that, you see what's my profit margin. And this is gross profit margin. It's not really refined. It's very general. But you're getting at like, generally like the general idea of the profit margin you want is like, it depends on every industry, but 40% is like a really confident margin. You're only spending 60% of what you're going to make. And then when you do your market research, you get more and more confident about what you're going to make, right? You get more and more confident about your pricing, about the number of units you can accommodate, right? That takes internal analysis of capacity, but it also takes market research. So the more confident you get, the more you can say, like, we think our profit margin will be 40%, 30%, 20%, whatever it might be. If your margin is 10%, right, that's a much riskier business model, because you basically are going to be spending a lot of money, and you'd better hope that you get the number of sales that you think you can get, right? Because with 10% profit margin, it's much riskier. For example, grocery stores have 10% or less. Some of them have 1%, 2%. It's a very volatile, very unprofitable business is what we would say about grocery stores. Whereas selling specialized services, can be a super high profit. You can charge you can make 90% of profit off of your cost of goods sold, like if you're selling software, for example. So it depends on the industry and the particular business model. Actually, when you start doing market research, you might learn what are the kind of standard profit margins for businesses in this industry, for facilities that rent to weddings. What do they tend to earn? What do they tend to lose in terms of profit margin? So that's the basic concepts, and that's as far as we were going to get today anyway, is just kind of the back of the napkin profit margin. So this tool, I will make sure to, once we hop off of Zoom, I'll share all of these files with you so you can actually start editing them all. And this is yours to, continue developing. And the point is just to make it very crude for right now, so you can kind of assess whether this is worth continuing down the path of. And then you'll eventually build out a pro forma, which is the much more detailed, specified, granular model for this.
Great.
Any questions about that?
No, not right now.
Cool.
Yeah. Really looking forward to digging into that.
Yeah. I find that part really fun. It's because you're just imagining and you're kind of throwing numbers down. And to me, it feels a bit like storytelling. We think it'll be this, we think it'll be that. And at this point, you don't really have a lot to go on. So you're just kind of imagining, but then as you do more research, you'll get clearer and clearer on what assumptions are reasonable assumptions for your business model. Yeah. So that's it.
Great.
And we went a little over time. Sorry if that was an inconvenience.
No, it's okay. I do have something coming up.
Okay.
Fairly soon, though. Do we want to just push like adaptions for COVID to next meeting?
Yes, let's do that. Yeah, we ran out of time today, but we should address that. I'll make a note to put that first next time.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward. So homework, I'm assuming, explore the other goals and outcomes, and then homework of kind of plugging in the COGS mockup.
Yeah, plugging in the numbers. And once you get to the stage where you think that your cost of goods is like all calculated and your revenue is a decent assumption, then come back to me and I'll help you calculate the profit margin itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Sounds good. Thank you, Caroline.
Sure thing. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.